Hey guys, welcome to Metabolism and Enzymes 2.5 Part 1. So today we are going to talk about metabolism. What the heck is metabolism? Well, I like to show this picture here of this young boy eating a very large and tasty looking hamburger. And metabolism is basically the processes that are going to break down that hamburger and then turn the nutrients in that hamburger, the carbohydrates, the fats, the proteins, and nucleic acids, into energy that your body can use. And so that's going to involve a couple of different types of things. It's going to involve breaking down those large macromolecules into their monomers and then utilizing those monomers to generate energy, or even to basically take some of those monomers and put them back together in a new way into other more complex polymers that make up your body. So, yes, you are what you eat because we're going to take that energy in that food and use it to power processes that are going to build things like muscle and proteins and hair and when we eat too much, excess fat. So here's a picture of metabolism, kind of looking at a cartoon version of that. And over on the on the left-hand side, we see our food molecules, and we label them A, B, and C. And as you can see, they're kind of large there, and we're going to ingest those food molecules. Cat, get off me. We're going to ingest those food molecules, and they're going to go through the process of digestion and in our stomachs and get absorbed in our small intestine, and they'll go to our bloodstream and eventually get passed into our cells. But the large food molecules don't get passed into our cells. Remember, they've been broken down in digestion, so now we have the monomers, the amino acids and the glucose molecules, and maybe some disaccharides, which are two glucose molecules stuck together, and maybe some of the triglycerides, which are fat molecules. Those will make it to our cells, and once in our cells, they will be broken down further via catabolic pathways. Catabolic means to break apart. And in that process, they're going to release some energy, as you can see there on the top, and heat. And when we break those large complex molecules down, we're going to be making the building blocks for other parts of our body. And when we take those building blocks, as you can see in the center part of the diagram there, those cellular building blocks, we're going to put those together via anabolic pathways. What's an anabolic pathway? That's a building pathway when we're putting small things together in order to build larger molecules, just like we did in class with the amino acids, and we made the big polypeptide. With the parts of the fat molecule, we made the triglycerides. With the carbohydrates, we took the two glucoses and we stuck them together and made a disaccharide. Our bodies do the same thing, and we're going to make up those larger macromolecules, D, F, and E, on the right-hand side of the diagram. I do also want you to notice that whenever one of these energy or one of these transformations occur, especially when we're breaking things apart, we are going to be releasing heat energy. Here's another more diagrammatic version of this, where on the uh, left-hand side we have catabolic pathways. Catabolic, remember, that means breaking things down. And so we're going to be taking our food in, and we're going to break the large complex food molecules down into smaller things such as waste products as CO2, carbon dioxide, and water, and we're going to release energy in the form of chemical energy. And we're going to use that chemical energy in order to uh, build things. So on the right-hand side of the diagram, the red part, we see we're starting off with small environmental molecules, and we're going to take the chemical energy that's been released from food, and we're going to use that energy to make large, bigger, more complex molecules in our body. Again, that's anabolic pathways, as we can see down there. Catabolic pathways, we break down and we release energy, and we're going from complex to simple. And in anabolic pathways, we're using energy, and we're going from simple to complex. And that's what metabolism is. It's the sum total of all the chemical reactions, catabolic and anabolic, going on in your body. Now, large molecules, we can sort of think of those things like carbohydrates and fats and starches and glycogens, which are forms of carbohydrates. That starches we find in plants and glycogen we find in animals. Okay, these are large complex molecules that are all held together by covalent bonds, especially lots of carbon and hydrogen bonds. And remember, those carbon and hydrogen bonds represent energy. And since the electrons are locked up inside those bonds, we call that potential energy. Okay, and just like a battery has lots of potential energy means the energy of position. I like to think of it more as the potential to do work or the potential to rearrange atoms. Okay, kinetic energy is basically the energy associated with the movement of electrons. So once we break a bond, electrons are released, they're moving around, and we can use that energy of movement to do work. And so in the picture here, we have a cheetah at rest. That would represent potential energy. And all of a sudden we see him running. That would be the kinetic energy or the electrons moving around the cell as a form of energy. Again, we are going to be able to use that kinetic energy to do work. And in chemical forms, as I just said earlier, that chemical energy, that potential energy is found in the bonds. And the potential energy we see in the body is called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And you can see that in this diagram. And it looks just like a nucleotide. We see a nitrogenous base, the adenine. We see a 5-carbon sugar, ribose, and we see not one but 3 phosphate groups. And if it was a nucleotide, there'd only be one phosphate group, but with 3 phosphate groups, that's where triphosphate comes from. And when we talked about functional groups, I did say the phosphates represent energy. And so this molecule, adenosine triphosphate, has 3 of these energy phosphate groups, and it does represent energy. This is what our bodies use to power our cellular processes. Yes, we eat food and we take that food and we digest it and we convert the energy in those complex carbohydrates and proteins and fats, and we convert the energy in those bonds into ATP, and that takes place in your mitochondria. We'll be talking about that a little bit later. Okay, and how do we do that? Well, if you look at the bottom part of this diagram, we take our ATP molecule and we put a water in there. What's that called again? When you put water in to break something apart? You got it, hydrolysis. We're going to use hydrolysis to bust off one of those phosphates. And when we break that bond of that third phosphate, it releases energy. And then our bodies use that energy of that bond when it's released to do work. As you can see in the diagram, it goes to a diphosphate. We see adenosine diphosphate and energy as a product. In the environment, we kind of do the same thing. In the top part of the diagram, you can see we constantly have energy coming into our environment in the form of light energy from the sun. And then plants and other photosynthetic organisms are able to take that light energy and convert it into chemical energy in the form of sugars. Okay, that is an anabolic process, a building process. Because what do plants do? If you look on this diagram on the left-hand side, we see CO2 and H2O, carbon dioxide and water, which are small, simple molecules. They go into the chloroplast, and the energy from sun is going to power the building of those, basically building those, taking those 2 molecules and converting them into sugar molecules, things like glucose, C6H12O6, which are larger, more complex, and therefore have more potential energy than does CO2 and water. Where did, where does that energy come from? It's coming from the sun. And then we, and also plants do this too when the sun's not shining, is they take the organic molecules and break those down, release that energy, and again, that's occurring in the mitochondria. And when they release the energy, they're going to use that energy to make ATP. And that ATP will then power cellular work. What's the waste product of this? CO2 and water, which, as you can see, can be utilized by plants again in photosynthesis. It's a cycle. All right, so a couple of things we need to talk about is our thermodynamics, and we're going to get into this into detail when you get to AP biology and also in chemistry, which you'll take next year. But we have two laws in thermodynamics, and the first law of thermodynamics is called the conservation of energy, and it basically states that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. However, we can transform it into other forms. So if you look at this diagram, what we see here is we see the sun at the bottom providing a constant input of energy, and we follow the energy by the red arrows. What do you notice about those red arrows? Is that they move through the ecosystem, and every time that energy gets intercepted by a trophic group, trophic groups are represented by those boxes. We see the primary producers; those are your plants or your autotrophs. We see our primary consumers or herbivores. They're the things that are eating the plants directly. Then we see our carnivores on top of that. We see microorganisms and stuff. Those are all trophic levels. Every time the energy goes through the trophic levels, a little bit of that energy, actually a lot of the energy, about 90%, is lost as heat energy or waste energy, waste products. Okay? So only a small amount of the energy from every trophic level, type 10%, is available to the next trophic level. Okay? So the energy is not created, it's all coming from the sun, and it's not destroyed because it's getting transformed into heat energy. Uh, and it's getting transformed into plants. As the plants grow, they're using the energy, and it's getting transformed into animal flesh. And as animals eat the plants, they convert the plant tissue into animal tissue, and of course, a lot of that energy in the plants gets lost as heat when the animals eat the plants and stuff. And again, we'll talk some more about that a little bit later. That's our first law. Our second law basically says that with every energy transfer from going from primary producers to primary consumers to secondary consumers, most of this energy is lost as heat, and that's called entropy because the energy coming into the system in the form of electromagnetic radiation, i.e., light, that's a very high quality energy. But it all gets transformed eventually into heat. Heat is a very low quality energy. We can't do much with it, okay? And that's basically entropy. That's disorganized form of energy. Electromagnetic radiation, gamma rays and light rays and things of that, that's high quality energy. Heat is low quality energy. And so as we go through time, the amount of low quality energy in the universe becomes greater and greater and greater, while the amount of high quality energy becomes less and less and less. So yes, eventually the universe will run out of high quality energy. It's been going for 13.5 billion years. It'll probably go on for at least another 13.5 billion years. So nothing to worry about, guys. But I do want you to notice the blue arrows, and that is the matter of a system. Those are the protons and the neutrons and the electrons. And I do want you to notice that the matter is recycled. Okay, the amount of matter is constant in the universe. It gets transformed into other things. Every single atom in your body once originally came from a star, and then on this planet, on planet Earth, the carbon atoms in your body, the phosphorus, the nitrogen, so on and so on, they've been part of different organisms and rocks and things of that nature, and you've just are borrowing them for a short period of time. You know, hopefully 80 to 90 years, but we'll see. So again, as I said, we use up ATP, tremendous amounts of ATP, this adenosine triphosphate, and we have to recycle that. And where do we get the energy to recycle ATP? We get it from our food that we eat. We break down those complex macromolecules. That's going to produce the energy. That's going to take ADP plus phosphate and put it together to make ATP. And then when our bodies need to do work, they're going to break that phosphate off the ATP, release energy, and that released energy is going to do work. My daughter's singing right now, and she's driving me crazy. I'm sorry, guys, if you hear her voice, but that's just the way it is when you got a 15-year-old in the house. Again, we've already gone through this diagram, but I just do want you to realize again that we're going to take the energy from our food, and that's what when we release that, we call that free energy. Okay, we're going to use that free energy released from our food to make ATP. And again, then we're going to use the ATP to go ahead and power all of our cellular reactions. We're going to use ATP to do work. Okay? And again, every time we break off that phosphate, that releases energy. So here's a better picture of it. There's our food coming in the form of chemical energy, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins and things. We ingest that. We're going to convert it into ATP. That's going to release heat every time we do that. And that's important because we are warm-blooded animals. And then we're also going to release waste products in the form of carbon dioxide and water and fecal material and things of that nature. And that ATP is going to be used to drive all our cellular processes. So what kind of work do cells do? Well, of course, they do transport. And we've already talked about this in terms of talking about transport proteins and whatnot. Active transport, where we're pumping things against a concentration gradient. Movement, of course, and that's going to be the power of muscles, and muscles are proteins, and they move and slide past each other. And in order to do that, they have to use ATP. And then, of course, metabolic things. We're talking about chemical reactions where we're taking small monomers and we're putting them together to make big polymers. Every time we put them together, we have to use some energy. And so ATP provides that energy. Anyways, guys, that's the end of our slideshow, and I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great rest of the weekend.